Spider-Man video games. It's been hard to resist these bad boys since the early 2000s. One of the few superheroes that has a consistently solid track record in the video game industry, rivaled only by Batman, but I'll get to that later. Like before, in my Jello Apocalypse-inspired Sonic the Hedgehog video, I'm going to be reviewing every Spider-Man game, in 10 seconds or less, before ranking them. This does not, however, include releases before the year 2000. Sorry, Mega Drive Spidey fans. So let's begin. A campy love letter to Spider-Man and Marvel Comics alike with simple but authentic gameplay. Okay, so we used the best villains in Spidey history. Who's left? The spiritual successor to the previous title was packed with content but sadly let down by poor controls. Spider-Man in open world is a dream come true with intuitive stunt controls, but if I flip those pizzas again, Mr. Aziz will flip out. Now, here's a little test of how a Spider-Man game could work. Great, release it. A simpler Spidey proves that sometimes less can be more depending on the style of the game. But best of all is the catharsis of playing as Venom. The greatest unintentional comedy in the history of gaming. Although the music is amazing. The ad campaign for this was literally no different from its next-gen counterpart. The game, however, well, that's just rude. Spider-Man gets his first cinematic universe.
But it's for babies!
A combat-obsessed Spider-Man for your edgelord 12-year-old brother. A 2D Spider-Man in 2008 was a thing that actually happened. They didn't believe the PS2 hardware could handle anything more. Once again, the ad campaign, identical to its next-gen counterpart. Sure, it feels like a return to form to the PS1 classics, but it plays like a button-bashing mess. Same old button-bashing mess, but now it's serious. Web swinging and combat are so automated that this may as well be a point-and-click adventure. Spidey's point-and-click adventure now comes with an utterly tone-deaf story and laughable presentation. The gold standard of superhero games. We've played Spider-Man in a number of games, now we experience it in the best story possible. Okay, that's all 16 of the Spider-Man games reviewed. Now let's rank them. In 16th place is Spider-Man II on the PC. Was this some sort of prank? The box art is all exactly the same as the console's version, but the game? Oh boy, now that's a different experience indeed. There are some games on this list that are unenjoyable and outright bad, but I can at least say they feel like complete experiences for what they are. This, on the other hand, well, put it this way. It's not New York, it's just kind of a city. You can climb on buildings, but you can never get to the top. You can web swing, but it has to be from these allocated spider symbols in the sky. And combat and pretty much every move you could possibly do is entirely on the mouse. There's a boss fight with Dr. Octavius which boils down to a game of Simon. This isn't a game, this is a college project. This is one guy's first test at making a Spider-Man game. It's hilarious how empty this thing is. This is the kind of thing where I kind of give it like a 1 out of 10, just for kind of like, it's got a little bit of ironic value, but not really enough. It is just a completely empty experience. In 15th place is SpiderMan Web of Shadows Amazing Allies Edition. This has to be one of the more cynical cash grabs in Activision's tenure. I give it more points on the PSP version than I do the PS2 version, and that's because this game feels like it actually belongs on a PSP. But even then, it's just a subpar side-scrolling beat-em-up masquerading around as the typical Spider-Man Web of Shadows. The ultra-edgy, gritty reboot of Spider-Man that sees a symbiote invasion across the world, one might actually expect looking at this. But what you get instead is a mission-based 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up. Because why would the PS2 of all things be able to handle anything better than this, am I right? It's not like we did several great Spider-Man games on this console. I think when I was 13, I wrote an angry letter to Activision about this. That's not something I say with pride, but it should give you a little laugh if nothing else. In 14th place, we have Spider-Man Friend or Foe. For all it's worth, Spider-Man Friend or Foe is okay. It's just a simple beat-em-up for kids that brings pretty much the world of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man all together for this one last adventure. Jesus Christ, this is the last official story told in the Raimiverse. Friend or Foe is ultimately just an interchangeable cash grab to cash in on the Raimi trilogy's success. It's a completely different genre to everything that preceded it and a completely different storytelling style. However, it is kind of nice to see the introduction of S.H.I.E.L.D. into the Raimi universe. It's fun for kids, but Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 2 is also fun for kids, so pick that one. In 13th place, we have Spider-Man The Edge of Time, and this game is just really not very noteworthy at all in my opinion. I mean, okay, it kind of focuses on Peter Parker sort of putting aside the whole great power, great responsibility mantra to sort of have everything he wants. And it also involves the death of Peter Parker, but the thing is, the story is so beyond the typical heart of Spider-Man, it's just like, who even cares, you know? It just doesn't feel like good Spider-Man in my opinion. I've never been big on the sci-fi inspired Spidey stories, but this is just... this ain't for me. And on top of that, the gameplay is that same button-bashing, combat-based stuff that we had in the previous one, Shattered Dimensions, and I get it, they're trying to take it back to basics, but back to basics would be more like Spider-Man 2000, not this. I'd much rather have platforming and storytelling than beat-em-ups. But that's just me. I know that this game has its place with those who love this sort of stuff. In 12th place, we have the amazing Spider-Man 2. I don't really know how to sum this up, to be honest. It is really easy to make fun of the amazing Spider-Man 2, the game. It's a game that really half-hearts it, but at the same time, it feels like it's applauding itself for every little thing that it does. Which also gets in the way of any kind of storytelling momentum or anything like that. It just keeps applauding itself with these little Daily Bugle things, little news headlines about how well you did. It's got some sort of like multiple choice dark-hearted story where Spider-Man sort of got to pursue his inner killer as encouraged by Kraven the Hunter, but then there's Carnage is on the loose and he's like, oh, Spider-Man, you've got the murder in you, you're just like me, and it's like this whole thing comes out of nowhere. But what's funny is characters just kind of talk without responding to each other, which is really hilarious. Especially in this scene where Cletus Cassidy first gets taken in and the doctors are talking, and Cletus is just like reacting to all of it, but his reactions are so forced. It just sounds like they didn't have the appropriate reactions just dug through other audio clips. The voice acting is horrible in my opinion, and maybe that's down to direction, but this is a really irritating Spider-Man in my opinion. He's just not right for the role, and there's so much bits where it feels like you're at a toddler's drama school and you tell a toddler like, now get angry, and like, and it's just like, that's what Spider-Man is like in this. The motion capture does not help matters. Now I know for a fact that this isn't the fault of the actors and the voice actors and everything, it must be a direction-based thing, because the motion capture is done by the director at Bat in the Sun, and if you've ever seen Bat in the Sun's YouTube videos, they are phenomenal. The missions in this game are very pedestrian. The web swinging is a step up from the previous game, but at the same time, it's just very automated still. And worst of all, they managed to make the open world not fun. If you don't fight crime in the allotted missions, robots come after you and attack you. It's literally fight crime or die. That's the thanks you get for being a hero. You're now expected to do it. I mean, that's a clever riff on society, but not something I want in the Spider-Man game. In 11th place is the amazing Spider-Man 1, the game. I know a lot of people that really love this game, but I just can't get behind it. There are these giant kaiju-sized robots taking over New York, searching for cross-species, and because of Peter's spider powers, he's registered as a cross-species. A big virus breaks out, and it's the end of the world, and it's all apocalyptic, and that's the thing, is like, Spidey does the apocalypse just ain't for me. Not when it takes itself so seriously. I know a lot of people really love this one, and maybe as a game, yeah, it's fine, but at the same time, I can't be dealing with jumping the giant kaiju-sized robot shark in Spider-Man games. And the web swinging, all you literally have to do is hold down the trigger button, and he will just swing, 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 and swing. Can you control the arc he makes? No, it's all completely automated. What a freaking circus. In 10th place is Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. This was kind of the first Spider-Verse-esque story of its kind. And story-wise, it's a lot of fun as we traverse lots of different dimensions and see 4 different Spider-Men team up. Mysterio is the main villain this time, and he's my favorite. And it's chock full of great references and great acting. It's just a shame the game's main gameplay components are entirely combat-based. It's a sight to behold with all the different art styles, but gameplay-wise it's very dull. It brings back some of the campiness from Spider-Man 2000 though, so it might be worth a try. Especially if beat-em-ups are your thing. In 9th place we have Spider-Man 3 for the PS2. It's not really fair to compare Spider-Man 3 for the PS2 to Spider-Man 3 on next-gen consoles. You should really only compare it to, say, Spider-Man 2 for the PS2 or Spider-Man 1 for the PS2. And it completely pales in comparison to both of those games. Spider-Man's moveset and stunt set is completely nerfed this time around, with very little control over what Spider-Man can actually do now. It's more about fight combos, but again, they leave a lot to be desired when compared to the versatile skill set of Spider-Man 2, the game. The campaign is extremely short and very unnoteworthy as well. They literally subtracted everything. What happened here? I get the feeling that this was designed for Wii first and foremost, which explains the simpler controls, which makes a lot of sense. But, I don't know, is it too much to ask for a version that's optimized for the PlayStation 2 hardware? Maybe readapt the controls for a little more versatility so it's not so limiting? Maybe I'm asking too much. Maybe it was simply a matter of we gotta get this game out for Wii and PlayStation 2, so the PlayStation 2 is gonna have to suffer. The end result, though, is just laughable compared to what's come before. Not to mention being half the length of the next-gen counterpart. Come on, there's no reason why the PlayStation 2 couldn't handle a little more than that. It did it before in previous games. In 8th place is Spider-Man 3, the game for the current gen consoles at that time. I did say that it wasn't fair to compare the PlayStation 2 and Wii version of the Spider-Man 3 game to the current-gen consoles version, and to instead compare it to other Spider-Man games of that specific console generation. The problem arises when not even the next-gen version of Spider-Man 3 the game compares to the previous games in the run. There's no reason why this shouldn't have been an improvement on all fronts, but it wasn't. Spidey's combat was absolutely nerfed and is easily the worst thing about the game. His punches seem to mean nothing, even with the black suit on. But then Spider-Man loses life like anything's business. And there's a ridiculously complicated control of the dodge system. It's no longer a button to dodge and counter, it's now you have to hold down slow motion mode, which is limited, and then just kind of be around the enemies, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. The web swinging is also a big downgrade from the previous version. Nobody ever points this out, but why did all the Spider-Man games after Spider-Man 2 switch to basic swing, where you could no longer hold onto a web line and then spin another while holding onto that? You had to literally drop one web line to spin another. Maybe I'm overcomplicating it in the way that I'm saying it, but Spider-Man 2 the game allowed for hand-over-hand webbing, as well as typical web swinging, so why did they get rid of that function in later ones? Perhaps it's because no one ever used it, but I liked having the option there. Well, anyway, in terms of missions in this game, it's actually kind of interesting at least. You've got the photography missions, you've got a lot of underground stuff, there's a lot of bomb defusal and everything. There's a lot of, like, puzzle solving to it too. If Spider-Man 3 the game had a more powerful Spider-Man to play said game with, I dare say it would be actually quite an interesting one, and I quite like the fact you can play it in pretty much any order. Story-wise, it's pretty non-existent, but there are sub-stories within it that are actually really good, like the Lizard and Craven Hunter going toe-to-toe. But it's one I really just can't be bothered with, just because of how ridiculously long it takes to beat some of these boss fights. The graphics and the animation are absolutely hilariously laughable on every account, even for their time. As I said earlier, it's worth playing just for the unintentional comedy that comes from some of these animations. Where I will give it bonus points though is the phenomenal soundtrack. This soundtrack is honestly one of the best Spidey soundtracks ever made. In 7th place, we have SpiderMan Web of Shadows. SpiderMan Web of Shadows is a lot of people's favorite, but for me, I just don't know. Spidey is very slick and agile in this game, which is a great thing. And combat is seriously satisfying, but to be honest, combat is most of what you'll be doing for the entire game. There's very little variety or versatility to this one. The first half is pretty much Spidey versus gangs, the second half is pretty much Spidey versus symbiotes. The thing no one ever seems to notice these days, though, is how bad has the game actually aged with you, you know? Like, when I was, like, 13, Spider-Man slow-mo walk into Moonlight Sonata while there's explosions and crashes behind him seemed like the coolest thing ever. Today I'm just like, man, that is edgy if you're a little teenager, but just really try hard now. Everything about this game is just edgy and it completely loses the spirit of Spider-Man. You get the option to make decisions based on the black suit or the red suit, which are fun for morbid curiosity, but if you're a real Spider-Man fan, there's literally no reason why you should choose the black suit options. A Spider-Man would never do any of this stuff. Not if you're reading it for the same reasons that I do. Spider-Man as a character in this game is just completely trivialized, and I just don't get that. The darkest ending involves him wanting to rule the world, so that's, like, that's not Spider-Man. But I guess at the same time, it's an excuse to let the player be their own hero. Make your own Spider-Sona, no matter how morally bankrupt they are, rendering Web of Shadows a self-insert fanfiction. In 6th place is Spider-Man II Enter Electro. Spider-Man II Enter Electro takes a lot of what made the previous Spider-Man game on the PlayStation 1 enjoyable. However, there's a lot of improvements here and there to the gameplay engine. Spidey's moveset is a little more versatile, and graphically speaking, it's nice to finally see some webs on him. The story takes a darker, more mysterious direction. But ultimately, it's just not as noteworthy as the original, simply because they were really scraping the bottom of the villain's barrel in this one. Where you had Doc Ock, Venom, Carnage, and Mysterio in the previous game, now you have things like Hammerhead, Shocker, and Electro. I don't know, they're not quite on the same level. The story's not on the same level, and this whole game just is not on the same level. It's fine if you want a little more of what came before, but overall, it's just not the greatest sequel in the world. In 5th place is Spider-Man The Movie, the game. This game is seriously frustrating to play through on the first time. So much of it is in the dark, and Spidey has no post-hit invincibility, meaning that enemies can simply just pummel you. But there is a saving grace to this: the cheat menu. This game is absolutely packed with additional content, and probably the ultimate saving grace of the game is you can literally play as the Green Goblin and play through his very own campaign, gliding across the city and terrorizing the gangs. And to be fair, gameplay-wise, it's pretty similar to what's come before. before on the PlayStation 1 original games. The controls don't really translate very well to joystick, and sadly Spider-Man spends so much of his time in confined indoor spaces. But at the same time, there are a lot of really enjoyable things in this game, and there's a lot to really explore here. Though I'd say playing it as a straightforward game for skilled players only, because this is a very frustrating one. In 4th place is Ultimate Spider-Man. If you've seen my previous video on Ultimate Spider-Man, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of the Brian Michael Bendis-led comic series, but I feel like this game really covered it in a really positive way. This world and this story are a breeze to play with. Spider-Man has been pretty simplified going from Spider-Man II the game. However, it works for this. It's a much more cartoony style, and man, does it work really well with the graphical engine. This game still looks great today, over 10 years later, but the most shining thing about this is the 2 ways to play. Sure, you can play as Spider-Man, take part in a lot of races, beat up some gangs, fight some boss fights, you know, standard fare, and it's all done as well as ever. But then you can follow your own story as Venom. You can terrorize the neighborhood, and you can make small work of the military, and even fight Spider-Man yourself. It's a very thrilling and very climactic game with a great storyline and great presentation, and absolutely impossible not to recommend for all Spidey fans. In 2nd place is Spider-Man 2000. Spider-Man 2000 brings us a really simple skill set for Spider-Man and a very simple game overall. It's platforming with a few puzzles and combat sequences, but its campy tone, its acting performances, its over-the-top music, its fun story, its great selection of A-list Spidey villains, ends up making kind of the perfect cocktail for a perfect Spider-Man game. And while later entries have certainly surpassed it in terms of how Spider-Man feels, this game definitely got the overall package spot on. It feels like you're playing in a comic book that really celebrates the character, and no Spidey game since has managed to recapture that. At least, not quite in the same way. But different magic doesn't necessarily always mean worse. In 2nd place is the cult classic Spider-Man II. I'm an absolute sucker for this game. This game was the first to really think, what would it be like to actually experience controlling Spider-Man with his full set of abilities? So you can now go on the ground level, you can explore New York to its fullest. Web swinging can take some time to master, but it's certainly not automatic anymore. And you can get some serious bullet-like speed in this. Combat is now a lot more involving, and you take on all sorts of challenges, big and small, be it taking down Mysterio, who's trying to take over the world, easily the highlight of the game, or delivering pizzas. Spidey does it all in this one, and it's just impossible not to love. The thing is, graphically speaking, it hasn't aged greatly. It was amazing for its time, but now today's standards, not so great. And a lot of the time, you spend a lot of the game just milling about, looking for crimes to solve to earn hero points to get to the next chapter, only to be greeted with a cutscene, and then rinse and repeat again. That is kind of just a nitpick, because this game is otherwise pretty perfect, but it is one worth mentioning. Overall, Spider-Man II, the game, is a nostalgic classic. It just never gets old. In 1st place is Marvel's Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4. I mean, who was really surprised by this? This game is just absolutely definitive Spidey fun. While there's a lot of familiarity in terms of the controls, you do get the feeling that this whole thing was built from the ground up. Sure, you press the same buttons to punch and web swinging all that, but at the same time it feels much more manual. You've got a lot more control over Spidey's momentum, what he does, what stunts he does. There's a lot more travel options and a lot more different ways to web swing, a lot more different styles, a lot of different combat styles, a lot of different costumes you can choose from. You can really make Spidey your own in this, and the sky's kind of the limit with him. The story is gripping and fantastic with spectacular performances and characters, and visually speaking, this might just be one of the best games I've ever seen. Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 never has a dull moment, but there's a lot of different missions you can do, big and small. When you're not thwarting Dr. Octopus, you can just go hunting for pigeons, or collect backpacks that piece together further parts of Spider-Man's untold story. Marvel's Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4 does everything this game should do. It maximizes Spider-Man from abilities to story, and I for one can't get enough of this fantastic reimagining of the character. Okay, so that's all the Spider-Man games. What do you guys think, and what are your thoughts? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit the like button. In the description below are links to the Patreon, where you can support my channel further, as well as the Discord, where you can come and have a chat with me and my friends. And if you don't know about it already, there is a new Spider-Man fan short coming to this channel very, very soon. The 5th of July, in fact, so stay tuned. A trailer will follow. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day.
No, what about it?
It's cancelled.
Really?
You didn't get the notification?
No, I didn't.
Oh, well, it's cancelled.
Yeah, well, I came all this way for nothing then. Hey, you want to hang out?
No.
I just heard there was a gunman. Tracy, you gotta get out of there. Tracy? Tracy.
Okay, so I guess the best advice I could give to anybody is this. Evaluate your circumstances, be brave. Be prepared to fail, but always get up. You owe it to yourself to be marvelous, so why regret being anything less? Well said. I'll see you around, buddy.